Welcome, everybody. It is the July 2025 installment of What's Up, No Fly Learn, right here from AOPA headquarters. Today's episode, we're glad to have you here with us, is Tune Up Your Flying. It's about the Air Safety Institute's tools for more proficient flying. We've got some great guests. We got a great guest on and some other announcements to make, so we're really excited about that. But before we begin in earnest, let's go through the basic controls for everybody. If you're on a computer, you've got the attendee control panel looking like this one over here on the right side there. And what you're looking for is, if you'd like to ask a question, look for the little cartoon bubble, like right here. Click on that, and then it'll open up the little box. Type in your question. Make sure you hit that send button, or we will not see your question. If you're on a tablet, then you're looking for something like this. It should be a question mark. Opens up the box, type your question, and again, make sure you hit that send button. Otherwise, we won't see your questions, and we would love to hear from you. So please let us know. My name, as always, is Chris Moser. I'm the Senior Director of Flight Training Education here at AOPA. I am a CFI, and I'm happy to be with you. I work with CFIs and flight schools, and glad to have back with us after a small vacation, we'll call it, Dan Justman.
Vacation with a lot of work packed in there, but that's all good. Chris, you said that we had a great guest on board. I was just wondering which one of us that was. I didn't.
Well, everybody is. Everybody's
okay, good. Guest, gotcha. Good. Hey, everybody, happy to be here. Dan Justman, I get to work with and lead the You Can Fly programs and teams that bring those programs to life each and every day. Instrument-rated private pilot. I love sharing aviation. Happy to get to do that with you here today. Would like to introduce, I think this is actually a return visit, Mary Kuehn. Mary, welcome back.
Happy to be back.
It went too fast. Hold on, there we go. Dang it, go, Mary.
Do we need to do it again?
Mary Kuehn. I am the Chief Flight Instructor and FERC Program Manager here at the Air Safety Institute in AOPA, ATP, CFI, and CFII, and happy to be back here with you all.
And more importantly, though, we want to make the announcement that Mary has agreed to be a regular co-host on here with us. So appreciate having her knowledge with us.
Happy to be here on a regular basis. It's going to be great. Awesome. And happy to have as a guest, right? Next.
Who is it?
I hope I'm the guest, or else I'm the wrong meeting.
The most important guest.
The most important. Well, a guest. They tried. They couldn't find anyone better. I'm Rob Geske. I'm the Senior Manager of Aviation Safety Analysis. I work with Mary in the Air Safety Institute, commercial pilot, single engine land, sea, multi-engine flight instructor, ground instructor. I am the numbers guy at AOPA. If you're looking for the accident numbers and you read the McSpadden report, that's my work. And if you see those pretty graphics, that also comes out of my shop. So if you like math and numbers, you're in the right place. If you want to talk about accidents, I'm told I only have an hour, but I'll give it to you.
And if they don't like it, Rob?
Well, feel free to argue, but bring your numbers, make sure you're right.
That's right. Argue the numbers. All right, go ahead, Dan. Oh, actually, Dan, you want to introduce Stephen?
Well, I will, absolutely. So that was all of our on-camera talent introduced today, but happy to, as always, bring back our behind-the-scenes, behind-the-fence guy, Stephen Schroeder. Say hi, Stephen.
Hi, Stephen. Oh, right. Working in the background, producing the episodes here, and working with Chris directly on a variety of projects and things around the office. So always a joy.
Always glad to have you, Stephen. All right, Dan, tell us a little bit about the AOPA Foundation.
Absolutely. Well, through generous donations to the AOPA Foundation, great programs like this, What's Up, No Learn Fly, as well as all of the programs that support the AOPA Foundation You Can Fly programs and the Air Safety Institute, are all funded by all of you out there. So if you are a contributor to AOPA Foundation, thank you. You help us make a difference in general aviation, in reach and safety, and we appreciate that. If you're interested in learning more about the foundation, what we do, or would like to become a donor, please visit us at aopafoundation.org.
Awesome. And hold on, click. Okay. There it goes.
2 questions. Didn't get them yet, but we know we're going to. Yes, Wings credit is available. If you're watching this presentation live, just need to have you registered with your FAA safety.gov email address If you aren't sure, or if you got the wrong one, we're going to share that link in the chat. Stephen, could you knock that out for us real quick? So everyone has a chance to click that link, and we'll be able to get the right email address on there. But you will get credit for that. If you are watching the recorded version, you will not be able to get Wings credit for that, which is a great segue into, yeah, we are recording this. You can look at this on either of the playlists on AOPA Pilot Video at YouTube or at aopa.org, webinars.aopa.org, both under the What's Up, No Learn Fly playlists. Any other questions regarding anything related to what we're talking about today or related to foundation or flight training, please reach out to us at ftinitiative@aopa.org, ftinitiative@aopa.org.
Awesome. And before we get into the content, we have our course, our This Day in Aviation History. Stephen, tell us about it.
Well, yeah, I was actually yesterday, but the Apollo 11 Saturn V rocket took off from Florida Space Center. What was interesting about looking stuff and learning about this, on the 17th, they would have been en route to the moon. All the announcements, because of the technology at the time, came out on the 17th. So we had all these awesome photos for the actual launch that were announced the following day.
Did Paul Darris put you up to this for today because the Air Safety Institute was on? I'm just wondering.
It just came up as like, that's pretty cool. So yeah, it would have been en route, and I believe they returned back to the Earth on the 24th of July.
Very cool. And I'm sure we're saying that about Paul because Paul is a huge space fan of all kinds of stuff. Yes.
Yeah.
All right, so what's on the checklist today? We're going to talk today, and we're really glad to have Rob on and Mary working in the Air Safety Institute as well. We're going to talk just briefly about what is the Air Safety Institute, what it is, what it does, what the major causes of general aviation accidents. We're going to try to hit the top 5 if time allows, what we can do to mitigate that, and then we're going to do a little bonus on the end talking about things that we can do to analyze and make our own flying even safer, hopefully in a methodical way. So Rob, please tell us, what is the Air Safety Institute?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So the Air Safety Institute, and we still get this today, so originally started off as the Safety Foundation, the Air Safety Foundation, ASF, as I think many of you call it. We've rebranded a number of times. So we are the Air Safety Institute, but don't worry, your emails still make it to the right place. It's founded in 1950. If you look back at the accident numbers in the 50s, kind of the fatal accidents were right around where the current non-fatal accident numbers are.
Wow.
So really high. We were losing people quite regularly, and the concern is that as a GA representative, you need to put your best foot forward. So the goal was to how do we get safety in front of pilots. There was a number of initiatives that came out of that work, and I think if you look really far back in our history, we used to do in-person flying clinics. We did some research that came out with what most of us would call affectionately the 180-degree turn. For escaping IMC, and we'll have a larger conversation about that. The future has changed a little bit. But what we are today is the largest provider of free aviation safety content. We have videos, podcasts. Mary here is diligently making sure that the CFIs are qualified to continue teaching through the EFERC renewals. And then we still have all of our old courses and quizzes. As they kind of become outdated, we remove them, but there still is great content there.
Awesome. And hey, Mary, do you want to put any plug in for the EFERC just in case there are instructors in the audience that maybe need to renew?
Yes, if you need to renew your flight instructor certificate, we have a great online flight instructor refresher course that's what I work on and keep current, and highly recommend it.
All right, cool. Check it out. And I admittedly, I've taken it multiple times, and it is honestly, I think, one of the best, if not the best, that's out there. So check it out if you haven't done so far. All right. So Rob, tell us about we're going to really high level here because we're going to go into depth into each one of these. What are the top 5 causes of general aviation accidents?
Yeah, so, and we're talking about fatal accidents here specifically. So loci, loss of control in flight. I think everyone knows that. We'll talk about the percentages later. That predominantly leads, and I'll help kind of phrase how that works. System component failure, power plant. This is really, power plant would be the engine and the propeller. So anything we talk about with a power loss or an engine failure, that's power plant. CFIT's probably a pretty easy one for everyone. That's controlled flight into terrain. UIMC, unintended instrument meteorological conditions. We typically think of this as VFR into IMC. It also covers things like loss of the visible horizon. So when you're flying over water on a dark night with an overcast and no moon, where's the horizon? So that can also be a UIMC. And then fuel.
Cool. All right, go ahead, Mary.
Nice. So next up, first up is loss of control in flight, which we know causes 43% of the fatal accidents. Rob, what are some typical causes for this type of accident, or what does this typically get labeled to?
Yeah, so it's kind of an open bucket and a specific bucket. When the NTSB can see that there is a stall or a spin, that falls under loss of control, and that means that there's evidence to suggest that either we have flight data or we have visual data or a camera image, like someone's doorbell camera, someone caught it on a cell phone in this day and age, or cameras at the airport. So if there's footage where we can see that there's rotation, or we can see that the aircraft is in a traditional nose low stall kind of attitude, that suggests strongly that it is loss of control. Things that become more difficult but still get grouped in loss of control would be, so you're out walking and there's a plane in a field and you go, that shouldn't be there. So what happened? And you begin, walking the scene, investigating. You look at the engine, you look at the flight controls, all the major components are there. There's fuel in the tanks. Well, it didn't hit anything. There's nothing that would have really caused this to happen, except we know that airworthy aircraft, and this aircraft doesn't have any mechanical failures that are suggesting that it isn't airworthy, don't just end up in fields, provided they have fuel and the engine still works. So what happened? So it must have been a loss of control. There's kind of no other way to group that, so they get a bucket in there, which is partly, and I won't say it inflates this percentage, but it's partly why we see it at 43% compared to the next lowest one, which is around 10 to 11.
Right.
Okay. So for our takeaway here, what are some things that you can do to mitigate having a loss of control accident? First on our list is decision making and risk management. I know we're going to get into VFR into IMC later, but a big thing is deciding, one, whether or not to go fly, but also making the right decisions when you're flying.
Maybe like the idea of maneuvering too, like the buzzing of the house. Should we do that? Probably
Yeah,
a bad idea,
exactly.
right?
Not the low flyblies, pulling up really fast, probably not the best decision. If you are a flight instructor, taking your students to adequate altitudes to practice stalls, or even if you're by yourself, you're not going to want to make unsafe decisions to help prevent that loss of control.
And I will, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So I will chime in on that note. Students are pretty good at the power off stall. It's an easy one to set up. The Proficient is the power on stall. And from the accident numbers, we've done a great job of the messaging of that base to final being kind of the deadliest spot for loss of control for stalls and spins. But realistically, where they tend to stack up more in the fatal accident stage is during that takeoff and initial climb phase, because you have that high angle of attack, that low airspeed, any engine power loss, even if it's not a complete engine failure, typically that speed bleeds off so suddenly and you don't pick up on it right away. And you've just gotten high enough that the impact forces start to really add up, as opposed to in the pattern where when you're getting lower and lower and lower and lower.
Oh yeah, that makes total sense.
It does make sense. So even then on a go around, be aware of it too. So it's that there's use good decision making, even train that nose down tendency as well.
Yeah. For Air Safety Institute, we have focus flight reviews for multiple topics, but one being positive aircraft control, talking just about that, having a precise climb and descent speeds and really focusing on your airspeed to avoid that happening, but also kind of like what you said, being aware if it starts to slip so you can catch if something's going wrong sooner, probably.
Yes, and in fact, we've got links just for all the a lot of the resources that we'll talk about today on the handout as usual. So I don't know if I have one specifically for the positive aircraft control, but I do have one to the overall focused flight reviews, because there's, I think, 4 of them if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and you can go through all of them. I think there's another topic in here that we cover as well. Plan and practice your emergency procedures. I think this is great. I know I had an instructor who would practice a departure, losing your engine on departure, so that it took away kind of that shock of, oh my gosh, we just took off, we lost our engine. So we were more comfortable with the steps, because most of the time people are over fields and practice the ABCs, and you have altitude and you have some time. So I think practicing it on the departure, especially if, like Rob said, if it's a big contributor.
The instructor in me would be remiss to say, don't practice it on an actual departure.
It'll be fine.
An emergency, and a number of accidents were practicing emergencies. So make sure you're at an altitude that allows for safe recovery in time. But again, something you can certainly simulate if you have like a long road or a long field or a straight object. You can slow that aircraft down. You can get all the the speeds right where you want. You can set that pitch attitude and have them climb like they normally would at what would be your climb speed, your VY, potentially your VX if you want it to happen sooner. And you can pull that power back and then ask them to just count to like 4. Yep. Because when it happens to you in real life, you're going to look down to see what the noise change was. You're not going to think, engine failure, push down aggressively. So so then they can see how fast that airspeed bleeds off. And then if they start to make that turn for that field and that nose is still up, you really start to get into the stall spin territory here.
There is a great article. You can find it by searching it. I know I've put it in past episodes too. AOPA has a video of how to practice the turn back, that impossible turn. So if you look up AOPA impossible turn, you can go check that out. And that's a great exercise to do. I would absolutely agree.
And last but not least, stabilized and approach landing. That's such a big thing to practice on your flight review, but also you can practice it on your own. I mean, I just read an article, I think it was, talking about, this was for flight instructors, but anyone can do it, practicing the transition from your cruise speed to the approach speed and keeping that stabilized and making the decision to go around if it's not stabilized.
Exactly. And of course, stabilized just being you have your off target altitude. You're not you're like on a typical 3-degree glide slope, and precise on those airspeeds, which we mentioned above too. So really get good is what is your target airspeed and be on it, be on your target altitudes. And if you see you're off, make the corrections early. So again, we could do a whole episode just on that too. Maybe we will.
Honestly, you really could. That being said, next up is unintentional instrument meteorological conditions. Rob, do you want to talk about kind of what this encompasses?
I pulled a little bit of rank here for a self-fulfilling prophecy, but this isn't the number 2 cause, that's engine failure. But I wanted to bubble it up just because there's, and many of you may know, but probably most don't, there's been some really concentrated effort in this specific accident cause. And while it's only 5%, it is, kind of in that top cause. The concern is when we look at UIMC, which we think of as VFR into IMC, which is certainly one, loss of visual horizon, as we said, dark water, dark sky, forest, unlit area, those all kind of are a desert or something where you don't have a good, backlit horizon or something to kind of tell you where it is. Clouds on the horizon can do that as well. The goal is a number of SMEs sat in offices and
what's a SME, Rob? What's a SME?
A SME is a subject matter expert.
Okay.
Just kind of the people who understand these accidents. We're talking investigators, manufacturers, regulators. AOPA is there to represent the pilot community, instructors, DPEs, all talking about UIMC. And what it is it's an underlying factor in a number of accidents. A precursor. We see a loss of control accident. We think, it's a stall spin. Well, really, what it was a flight from VFR into IMC. The pilot likely became spatially disoriented and lost control of the aircraft. Same thing. CFIT accidents, those are kind of the terminating flights of VFR into IMC. We typically can see the mountain unless it's, not lit. How did the goats get up in the clouds type of mentality. But because it has so many underlying factors to a number of accidents, and even the component failures where we see, the pilot gets into VFR into IMC, loses control, breaks out, gets startled by the ground and the angle upon which they see it, they yank back on the controls. They're in a bit of a, kind of like a turn. And so that over-G's the wings, they separate the wings or they separate the tail. So the industry said, well, we need to be doing something about escaping these situations. And as I said, AOPA was the one who kind of championed the 180-degree turn. And so we're here championing. That is a great procedure to avoid IMC. And it's not something we would rule out in IMC. But when you get faster moving aircraft, anything with, turbocharged or something where you have a pretty good tailwind even, the standard rate turn that most people are taught, you'll get a bank angle such that you can induce spatial disorientation. You'll have so much tip over just in that it's probably not a good thing to say, this is the escape technique. By the way, you may also get some spatial disorientation by doing it. So the industry looked at it as we're not ruling it out. It's still certainly an option, but more conversation on, is a climb appropriate? Is it a low-lying level? And a climb also works in the sense that if we think of traditional pilots, we get lower and lower and lower as the clouds come in. And so what wasn't terrain or an obstacle before, and we didn't see on our flight path because we've been scud running, has now put us in that perfect position of a turn may hit terrain. Same thing if icing is above you, a descent, especially if you just entered clouds instead of trying to turn out of them, a descent. The problem is getting pilots to understand that, we train foggles on, foggles off, and it's immediate, right? IMC, no IMC. And that's not really how these accidents shape up. Pilots continue into worsening weather, or it closes in around them. And so by the time you think, well, 180-degree turn, it could be 10, 15 minutes to get back out of it. Whereas, well, you might have a thin layer if you know where the tops are, and a 200-foot climb is much easier to get back into visual conditions, then turn back to where VFR conditions are. And same thing with the descent, keeping that visual horizon and then diverting to an aircraft. Again, we're not saying this one over that one. We're just trying to give more tools to the toolbox of the pilot and to make sure that training gets there. And again, autopilot, if you have it, make sure you know how to use it, couple up. That's certainly a great technique as well to help avoid these. So just kind of me bumping this up, but more conversation on that. And there's been requests to the FAA to amend training to address these issues.
So what are some of the practical ways that we could then try to avoid this or mitigate it? Well, number one, as Rob just said, it's more of an insidious thing. It's us pushing it. So probably two big things you could do is, number one, check the weather, get good briefings, and just don't fly near the stuff. And then I'm going to jump down to that last bullet and throw that out there too, is have some personal minimums. It's like create minimums, because we see that insidious trap of, well, it's only a little bit lower, I can probably make it through. It's probably going to be clear on the other side, and that is going to get you in trouble.
And having the personal minimums, so many checklists are just like METAR details for your departure airport and don't encompass the entire route or the bigger picture, like the system in the area or things like that. So making sure that it's like, oh, well, the weather here is okay, we can take off, but yeah, making sure destination airports along the way, that just encompasses the whole thing, the bigger picture.
And I even say that maybe those personal minimums, having that down, and we have the link on the handout with the contracts the ASI, the Air Safety Institute, provides, can help you fight those psychological, physical issues. Because we've talked about this before. I know it's that idea of we do self-pressure to ourselves probably more even than our passengers do. It's that mission mindset of like, oh, I can make it, or I want to accomplish get the flight done, or I want to get where I was going, and end up kind of pushing ourselves into it. And I know for me, like I said, flying freight when I did, single pilot, the things I got myself into were usually my own fault. It wasn't even, my company was good. They did not make me do it. It was my own fault, get their itis, whatever it might have been.
Right.
And then of course, don't be afraid, as Rob already mentioned, use your internal/external resources. So like the autopilot, hugely important. For weather updates in flight, you've got flight service you can still contact. You've got ATC, just ask them for help. Or in EFB, which is the electronic flight bag, that'd be like your for-flight Garmin Pilot sort of thing, where you can get weather in cockpit or maybe even on your display. And then the last one there being, make sure you're training flight by reference to flight B. I just noticed the typo. Flight by reference to instruments, not flight B reference, but maybe it will be. Anyway, make sure you train it. And the other thing is, if you have the opportunity or can get the opportunity, go fly in actual IMC with an instructor, preferably an instrument instructor, so you can see what it's like. Because as Rob just mentioned, when you enter a cloud, it's not typically on off, although sometimes it can be. A lot of times it's more insidious. It's kind of wispy and things.
Going in and out.
Yeah.
And that can even be more spatial disorientating going through, and versus just having the all white. Then it's just like, okay, let's focus at my instruments. If you're going in and out of it, you kind of want to try to get out, or you're looking at your instruments, half looking outside, and
And the weird part of like flying right over a cloud deck, and you got all the weird cloud stuff here, and it just throws off the horizon. Yeah, that really is disorienting. So absolutely. Okay, let's go to the next one. Rob, tell us now, you did say this is the actual number 2 at 10%. Tell us about this component failure with the power plant.
Yeah, and we think of this as an engine loss or an engine that isn't producing full power. Anytime it is, I'll tell you, like true mechanical in nature, sometimes there's a human factors element to that true mechanical in nature, i.e. you have a mechanic who failed to catch something that was wrong with the engine, or sometimes it's the pilot's decision not to replace a component because it costs money. And it's one thing to say, hey, does it need to be done now? And your mechanic says, well, I'd recommend it, but it's not required. And so you go, wow, I think we can hold off another 500 hours. And then it collapses in flight and you don't have induction air coming in and you're sitting there going, Well, hopefully the alternate air works and you have a solution there. But those are also kind of system component failures where there is a human element involved in that decision. Same thing we see where we have a aircraft that has sat for an extended period of time. And I mean, even if you look at the manufacturers, the engine manufacturers, they'll recommend pickling engines if you're going to hang them up for more than 3 months. And it depends on the engine, the series, and really what goes in there. But I think we all know the hour limits. The 1,500, the 2,000 hours, the 10 years kind of timeline that they're putting there. But there'll be aircraft; those aren't required until you get into the more regulated world like 135. But you have a classic example. You have an aircraft. Someone goes to buy the airplane. Well, it's sat and hasn't flown for 5 years and no one's done anything. It doesn't even have a current annual. And you say, okay, well, I have a great guy that I trust back at my airport. It's only 500 miles away. And I think we'll be fine. We'll get a ferry permit. So we'll do this legal. And then you look in the logbook and you go, okay, well, it's never been overhauled. There's 3,500 hours on this engine. It's 30 years old. I'm a pretty good pilot. Let's go. And then, boom, engine failure right in the climb. Or worse, you kind of get somewhere and you get over terrain. So those are kind of the ones we think of as we should have been a bit more thoughtful. But again, we got the ferry permit. We thought we could make it. It was a one-leg flight, even if it's a shorter distance, as opposed to maybe we should just take the engine out, send it into a shop, have it overhauled, bring it back, do the annual type of thing. Other ones are true stress fractures. These are older aircraft. They are components. Things move around in them. We have metal in the oil. We have rods and pistons failing to get lubrication, and so they fail in flight. They seize. There's always the classic case of the bolts on the propeller are fatigued, and the propeller unscrews itself and leaves the aircraft, and you get to watch it trail away, and then typically go over your goes right over your head. Or on a twin trying to drops off, you'll know because the engine will rev way up. But again, all of those are power plant failures. Some of them are more human driven and some of them are more environmentally driven.
Gotcha. So Mary, tell us about what can we do?
Yeah, if you going on the more environment driven, so if you are in the situation and there was nothing that you could do to prevent it, I think the biggest thing at first is to assess the situation, the issue, and how much time you have. I think a lot of times people can become distracted by the issue at hand and fixated on fixing it or troubleshooting it and just managing the problem at hand, which is running the ABCs, airspeed, best place to land, your checklist. And then if you have time after that, then the checklist actually, I think, usually does go through some type of troubleshooting of restarting the engine, things like that, if you still have your propeller.
That would be critical.
It's rare. It's pretty rare
that didn't fly off. And then, like we've talked about before, training regularly and realistically. So with your instructor, going over the procedures of if you lose your engine. We've talked about this, I think, the last time on the webinar, having some familiarity with your checklist and the emergency procedures on them, so you're not reading it and saying, wait, what? Or where is it on the checklist, flipping through the book, if that's the type that you use. Just being able to flip straight to something and being comfortable with it really can help you if it's time sensitive. And the adrenaline of the situation is also going to probably make you fumble the book a little bit more, depending on the person.
Just getting those memorized and then even using like a sim too to drill it, right? So you just get it down cold. Yeah.
I mean, even at home, chair flying, you can chair fly, pulling out the checklist and running through, the hand motions of where things go. Knowing and maintain. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead with your comment.
I was going to the next bullet.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I will say in terms of like engine failure and components and chair flying, it's critical because what happens is there are a number of accidents that are loss of control accidents that started as an engine failure. So the pilot is doing a good job of trying to glide the aircraft at this point or auto rotate the aircraft, and it's that they're just not kind of cognizantly thinking through the process and recognizing they don't have power, so the speeds are going to be different, the drag factors are going to be different, and what happens is they do a really good job of getting it lower and lower, and then when they get close to the ground they lose control of it.
Right.
And that becomes also a bigger problem, well, not necessarily a bigger problem, but a larger component when you're looking at twin-engined aircraft where you have VMC coming into play and pilots slow down or they're turning into the dead engine. And so you have this case of, well, you may have been slow and the drag is helping you around, but when you go and try and roll wings level and get out of it, you can't.
Right.
Yeah.
Hey, Dan, you have a question for the audience?
Yeah, a quick question, Rob, while we're talking about power plant, any thoughts on engine oil analysis that we could weigh in on here? It seems like a good idea, good value. Maybe you can provide some insight there.
Yeah, I'm a fan of engine oil analysis, so state your bias up front. I think there's two really critical systems. You know, something that is doing engine monitoring for you is a great tool because it's diagnostic. It might not be diagnostic to a pilot, but to a mechanic, certainly it gives you more information. It can help even pilots see trends over time, but the oil analysis is something that all pilots can do. You don't have to have that equipment installed. And again, there's a spectrum that they look at in terms of telling you if the aircraft is starting to ingest itself, starting to make more metal than we would like it to, and giving you a component kind of failure aware, right? Based on the chemicals and what they're seeing in the actual oil sample itself, they'll let you know that, hey, this composite of you know, or this composite of chemicals in this report is telling us that this component is failing. So you know, it hasn't failed now, but just to make you aware. And again, I'm also a big stressor. I know it's not regulatory, but there's something to be said for having a full engine overhaul on an aircraft engine. I know that can cause fierce arguments, but at the end of the day, you'll have, again, me speaking specifically, you have a hard time convincing me that pulling something apart and looking at all the individual components is worse than just saying, well, we know how we fly this aircraft, we'll wait till we have some of the signs. So it's a balancing act, and it's certainly, I'm not insensitive to the cost of doing that as well. But just an oil analysis, great thing, engine monitoring, great thing, and the overhaul at the appropriate intervals is another good thing.
So cool, all about the maintaining. Go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, no, I think that leads right into knowing and maintaining your systems as far as a way to mitigate this. Knowing if you have those tools available to be monitoring your engine and doing the overhauls at the recommended time, knowing those recommended times and things like that, I think it can all really help you mitigate a problem from actually happening. And then obviously training, we kind of were touching on this, training regularly and realistically all the way down to the ground, not landing in a field, but you can practice an engine out to a runway so that you can get that experience of not having the engine and the ground effect and the airspeed. It's kind of like we were talking about. I think that could be valuable with a flight instructor, probably would be best.
And even practicing even the power off 180 with a commercial maneuver, because you get used to that coming from the high key, low key position, all that sort of stuff that you can read about in the airplane flying handbook.
Yeah,
hey, just time check everybody real quick. We're 32 past the hour, so we just want to make sure we're able to hit everything. So let's see if we can what else do we have left on this one to talk about flying into the ground? Yeah, Mary,
and then
talk about
good route selections with outs. Make sure you know those along your route. And don't forget to declare the emergency with ATC, and maybe they can help you out too.
And just one quick emphasis there, people are so reticent to declare an emergency. It's just a way to get help. So please don't be afraid to do it. I don't know, Rob, if you see it in the reports that you read, but when people do declare emergencies, well, we've talked to ATC, they hardly ever have to fill out paperwork. And even if you do, it's better to be on the ground doing that than be in an accident report instead.
Absolutely.
So first and foremost, you should declare early and declare often, has always been my, and you can declare an emergency and then you can have sorted what you needed to fix. And a common one here is if they send you out over water and you don't have life jackets, you can declare the emergency. So you don't have to do that. Then when you're back on track and you don't have to go back out over water, you can cancel your emergency. That's certainly something that you can do. As someone who has declared a few emergencies and had a few, ATC can declare an emergency for you if they think you're in need of assistance, and had the fire trucks and ambulances all set to meet me on the runway. It certainly gives you more resources, and it's a better path forward than trying to figure it out yourself, because you can declare the emergency and delegate to ATC, I need a vector to a field. Instead of you trying to figure out what one is suitable, they can work that for you. You can say, hey, look, I'm in weather, I need an out. I don't care where it is, I need you to tell me where out is. It may take them some time to do that. They're not going to have all of that on their head, but I'm a huge proponent of declare early, declare often. And again, don't be afraid of the paperwork. In all of the emergencies I've had, which I can count on more than one hand, the amount of paperwork I have filed, I haven't counted yet because I haven't been asked.
There you go. Same for me. All right. Hey, let's go to the next one here. And again, we're just going to try to keep these concise just so we can make sure we hit all the big topics we want to talk about. Controlled flight into terrain, 6% on this one. Rob, just tell us briefly, what are we seeing there? When does this happen?
And this one is, I think, kind of obvious to most pilots. They didn't see the obstacle, the terrain, what have you. So how did they hit it? Typically, we think of this as a decision making. But again, we talked about UIMC, we talked about VFR into IMC, where the terrain wasn't an issue when you did your planning, but you've been descending for the past 3 hours to stay below that cloud deck. Now you're in the cloud decks, you want to turn. Oh my goodness, that tower that I never considered, I've just hit. And hitting like even like the guy wires on big radio towers and masts. So sometimes we think, oh, there's a great radio tower, I can use it as a visual reference point and circle around it, and then your student gets a little low and there's not necessarily marker beacons on those guy wires, and especially the really tall towers, they go out quite a way. So how do you in one hand balance using a great visual landmark and then not hitting it, but two, most of these CFITs, there was something, a weather element, a night, a darkness, a visualization element where they hit it. There are kind of flat light conditions or snow or water where you can't necessarily see it, and the shadows aren't cast in such a way that you don't know your depth perception essentially suffers. So you don't know where it is or how far away from it is. So there is cases of people flying into like terrain, like just into the ground, because they didn't know exactly how far away they were from it.
All right, and so the big things are, what can we do to mitigate it? Well, number one is research. Plan that route and know your weather, as I said right there. When it comes to planning the route, there's some really good tips. And I was looking at the ASI resources, and I believe it was collision avoidance. I believe it was the Safety Center on Collision Avoidance. I put the link on the handout, not to the collision avoidance, but if you look under there, there was a CFIT section, because both traffic and obviously don't hit other stuff. And the big thing there were the recommendations there were really good. Look at your charts, which I've got some samples on the screen here. Use your EFB, or if you've got the terrain information on a glass cockpit, use that to help you avoid it. That should definitely help. I saw somebody asking a question along those lines. An interesting one, notice on the one diagram I've got right here, I'll use the mouse to kind of circle it, this RP, that right pattern for 2.6 at that airport. When that's there, oftentimes it's because there's terrain on that side of the runway. That's why it's there. So you can use that as a clue of like, oh, that airport's got a right pattern. I wonder if there's terrain in the area. They recommend in the ASI thing too, I think I watched a video on this, Google Earth, put yourself on that airport and just do like a 360 using Google Earth. You'll be able to quickly tell what the terrain looks like there. And then we've got instrument obstacle departure procedures. We did a whole webinar on this just a few months ago, or maybe it was last year, but we talked a lot about that. But that's basically a procedure to get you up and away, whether it's in instrument conditions or in VFR at night, to help you avoid that sort of stuff. So check your weather. Really be careful, because that's probably why you're going to hit it. Because you obviously, like Rob said, you're probably not going to hit one that you see. It's going to be the ones that you don't. However, stick around for next month when we talk about mountain flying, because density altitude, I would imagine, are some of the causes of these, right, Rob? Density altitude being where they can't climb away from the terrain.
Yeah, so failure to avoid terrain is also going to be a CFIT, and this is the valley floor coming up to meet you.
Exactly, where you just can't climb quite enough away. All right, let's pop to the next one. Mary, take this one over.
Yeah. So Rob, can you tell us what are some of the causes, types of accidents that you see when it's labeled as fuel as the cause?
Yeah, these ones get interesting, because if the fuel doesn't flow to the engine, is it an engine failure, an SCFPP, or is it a fuel issue? And you have to start thinking, well, where did the fuel get obstructed? The ones that most people are probably familiar with are exhaustion and starvation. So exhaustion is when you no longer have available fuel in the tanks, or in such a way that you would have flown it that there wouldn't have been available fuel to the engine. And what that means is essentially we've come to the scene of the accident, and we know that the aircraft only had enough fuel for 2 hours of flight. They crashed at 2 hours and 20 minutes. It's likely an exhaustion. It doesn't necessarily mean it is, but likely. And starvation is where we have adequate fuel, but we can't get it into the engine. So there's an obstruction somewhere in the system. And then there's incorrect fuel type, which is a pretty small one. We've gotten pretty good. They still do show up, especially in aircraft that look more like turboprops. Be careful if you're not filling your aircraft, that the FBO individual who is fueling it for you knows, and you're there to watch them put in the right fuel. Oftentimes they're putting in Jet A instead of 100 low lead. And you would think to yourself, oh, well, those collars are designed in such a way to prevent the Jet A nozzle from working. several FBOs just operate the standard small nozzle because they fuel helicopters. The other one that we see, and I always give it to people for their creativity, is the accident comes out and the FBO employee stated, well, I just twisted the nozzle sideways and poured it out a little slowly and I was able to fill it up. So, you know, I didn't see what the issue was. And you say, well, it said 100 low lead right there and it was blue. And then there was a green sticker and it said, you know, avgas only. And they're like, well, I twisted it and I got it. So just be aware of that. And I always encourage it. I know it's difficult to always be there. But certainly if you have a plane and you can look at the accidents to see how many times they've incorrectly fueled it, I would say as a 172, you're going to have a hard time getting that. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen. And with some of the newer fuels, MoGas might be one that, you know, gets in there if you're not aware, but just kind of be ever present for that. The other one is that most people don't think about is fuel deteriorates kind of components and equipment over time. And I mean, over time, it's, you know, we look at it to make sure it doesn't just readily do that. But, you know, in terms of what people are storing and in terms of if it sits in the aircraft for a long period of time, it's not quite performing at the same level. Again, you know, we get water in the tanks as well. That's another fuel related item.
Well, that leads right into, I think, our biggest way to mitigate the risk is having the thorough pre-flight and, if you can, be present at fueling so that you can avoid those things from happening even in the first place.
And keep your fuel fresh. And I'm not saying change it all the time, but if you're going to go a long time, try and make sure you get fresh fuel in there, something to, you know, drain off what's been in there for a while. And I'm talking an extended period of time. I'm not talking you haven't flown in a month. I'm looking at, well, I was flying, I had something, you know, medical or something lay me up. It's been 2 years. Drain that fuel out.
Right.
Or, yeah, try to plan it where you use it up before, if you know it's going to say, so like going on vacation.
Don't
use it up in the air, though.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm sure you could find a time building CFI to go fly it for you to burn up the fuel so it's not sitting in there. But know your systems too. Endurance rather than range. Plan with 1 extra hour in the tank. I mean, that's an easy one. Don't fall victim to not having enough fuel. Checklist discipline and having extra things in place to remember to switch the tanks. I like to have multiple things to kind of remind me, and it's always good to tie new things to existing habits. So if you're trying to remember to do it, maybe do it alongside something else, whatever it may be. And then proper leaning. And if you need to, declare an emergency early and often.
And then, of course, ASI's big thing too there is land with that hour in the tank, plan that stuff out, and land with the hour. There's a funny video that you guys have on the website. It's actually a few years ago, but has a gentleman driving the old car, and it's like he's just, oh, you can go below E, and you should check out that video. It was really good. I enjoyed that. And that was in one of the safety centers. So it's like I put the general link because there's tons of ASI stuff. It's all really good. So go check it out. All right.
Limitless.
It's limitless. All right. So what about the other bad habits you might have developed? This is something that I talked about in an episode, and I think I do have this one linked on the handout. And I was talking a lot about the error-based learning, how we can learn from when we make mistakes. So these are just some of the ones to do the catch-all. Because Rob, we were able to talk about the big 5 things, but also we know that pilots get complacent, they can get sloppy. And so one of the things I'm going to throw out there is really pay attention to what you're doing. And the way you can do that is think to yourself as you're flying. If I had to teach somebody how to do this, because all of us as instructors know this, I was a huge learning curve of like trying to teach somebody to do something. And I had to think to myself, what is it that I do with my feet? Or what is it that I'm doing with my hand? Because we don't think about it. That will help you really pay attention to be present with what you're doing. And then also know that, and this again, I went into detail about this in that previous webinar, anticipate the fact that we are human, we are going to make mistakes. And that's what Rob literally studies, I think, is people making mistakes and hopefully trying to figure out how to mitigate that. So know that we're going to do it, be ready to admit it, recognize it, learn how to recover from it, and then reflect and learn on it. Can I do something, what can I do in the future to help me not do that again? And then finally, I put a link to this as well in the handout. We have a post-flight reflection form. I believe I've got an article that explains how to use it and the form itself. And what that does is it allows you afterwards to really sit and think to yourself, okay, how did my flight go today? What went well? What can I do to keep doing that? What didn't go so well? And what can I do to try to improve that in the future, even if it means maybe doing some extra training, getting with an instructor to help me. So just that in itself can get you to start reflecting which then leads us into, I know this next part, I believe, is the safety culture. And so let's just pop to that one really quick.
Yeah, it's reflecting to see, yeah, build the safety culture to have the strong habits, the safe habits to prevent things getting into these situations in the first place. Good, safe decision making, able to assess your ability to do something honestly. So, I think a wind personal minimum is a perfect example of honestly, what are you capable of as far as your gust factor? And if you need to change it, maybe fly with a flight instructor to really see your limits. Doing what's safe, self-reflective, and continuously trying to improve yourself. Like we said, using that reflective kind of analysis of your flights to know, okay, what am I good at? What am I not good at? I used to be good at this. Maybe I've gotten a little lax on it lately, and I need to practice with an instructor or practice it a little bit more. And then we also talked about establishing an SMS scale to whatever operation you have.
What is an SMS, Mary?
Safety management system. Yeah. And so I would say it's somewhat similar to a like SOP, standard operating procedures for yourself. So whether you fly in a flight school, a flying club, or just yourself, having kind of a set of standards that you follow so that you can hold yourself to that safe standard of, oh yeah, I mean, there's so many things that we ask or we expect to do before flights and the pre-flighting and everything. So to have it written out and you can review it, like make sure you're adhering to what you do want to do.
Cool.
I think it's worth pausing briefly. There are really great consistencies in aviation. 70% of all accidents are human factors related, right? Human error mainly in decision making, and pilots are really good at overestimating their ability. So there's a number of studies out there where we would speak to a pilot, say, okay, what do you think you can do today? What would you be able to handle? And then we'd go and throw them in a simulator, and surprise, they can't do it. So as you step back from your flying a little bit, or if you have had a break or it's seasonal, like where we have winter in the north, recognize that what you went in as and what you're coming out as are two different pilots, and you're not the same pilot, regardless of and it's across, regardless of the amount of experience you have. What helps with experience, a really good experienced pilot, isn't the number of hours, but the ability to recognize when their flying is deficient and then go and make sure that they plus up that area, make sure they focus on that while also still not forgetting their other skills. And really, I don't think there's any reason why we see human factors as a large cause of accidents, and then we understand that how pilots assess their abilities is somewhat lacking in terms of being honest with yourself. Good, safe pilots are honest with themselves, and sometimes that honesty needs to be brutal and recognize I can no longer do that. Yes, a month ago I could have, but today is not the day, and I shan't be doing it. And to my students, I always said, I know you can do any one thing, but can you do all of the things in an emergency while on fire? And if the answer is I would struggle with that, then we have a bit more to learn. And I'm not saying that that's the reality of flying, but that should be how you approach things. Is this will be a challenging flight for me. How challenging would it be if any of these things happen? How challenging would it be if I lost all my lighting, if I lost all my instrumentation, if I couldn't fly the plane adequately? Do I need all of the performance? So when we start to think of, can I fly in marginal weather? Sure. Can I fly in marginal weather without radios, without comms, without an electrical system, and the doors open? Maybe. Right? Well, we start to add some other elements, and I would encourage all pilots to take a really hard self-reflective look and say, can I do this in the worst condition with an emergency and people screaming at me? And if the answer is yes, then by all means, I applaud you, but I think we need to take a true honest step all the time in our flying and step back and say, can I do this today? And what would that look like?
And to your point there, too, Rob, just to wrap this up, because we only have a few minutes left here, is just that part two of also test yourself, like you said, because you said, could I do it? Maybe you think you could, but then go test yourself with an instructor and a sim to see if you actually can, and then be honest about those results. And then you can always work to then improve and get to that point. All right, we've got just about 5 minutes left. We've got two other things we wanted to mention. So Rob, if you can briefly tell us just a little bit about, I put a link to the FAA's FRAT or Flight Risk Assessment tool. Can you just tell us a little bit about the value of this and why this might be something folks should consider doing?
So we teed it up nicely. We were talking about self-assessments. A FRAT is a great self-assessment tool. It is looking at your individual risk, the risk in the operation. Basically, there are ones that are kind of preformed. Ideally, you customize these a little bit to your operation, but a preformed one has to do it. It's essentially a point scoring system, and it's telling you what risk the flight is. A lot of these do kind of like a green, yellow, red. So green means there's always risk, but it's acceptable to the operation, to what you've acceptable. Yellow means that there's an elevated risk. It doesn't necessarily mean that you can't do the flight. It's just highlighting that this flight is going to be more risky, put you in that mindset. And then red is saying you need to do something to mitigate because you've told this tool that this is an unacceptable or an unsafe flight. That doesn't mean you still can't do the flight. And I want to encourage you that you need to mitigate the risk. And that mitigation may be, well, we can't do the flight today.
Yeah, one of these conditions needs to go away or get improved before doing it. Awesome. And then again, this is where you can go check those limits with the CFI to see where you honestly are, and then assume if you haven't been flying that it's probably, gotten rusty. All right, and then the last little bit here, just to wrap things up before we are going to take questions. I know because I've seen some questions from the audience here, so we'll get to those in just a moment. But tips for tuning up. Let me click and make it actually go. There it goes. Tips for tuning up your own flying. So kind of hopefully a wrap up here. Number one, look, I think what Rob has said, I think Mary said the same thing. Be honest and reflect on your flying, and don't be the kind where it's like, oh, I'm still good. Really be honest and hard on yourself in terms of, you know, what can I really do, and really start to recognize. And that's where I was getting at that part of paying attention. You know, I might think that I was always really good at landings, and then now I go out and be honest, that landing didn't go as well as I thought it did. And so what do I need to do to fix that? So that post-flight analysis exercise could be a way to help you develop that. Go train. And that's what I think the whole Focus Flight Review program is about. And even the Wings program, again, Wings credit for those that are here live. But seek training with a CFI and go train regularly, not just every 24 calendar months, but do it on a regular basis. And the Wings program and the Focus Flight Review, which I think gets you Wings, breaks it up, and you can do it a little bit at a time. So you're more like professional pilots do, where they're doing it every 6 months or something. And that keeps them much sharper in doing that. And like I said, you can consider using the Focus Flight Reviews. And finally, always, and we're glad you're here today, refresh and build your aviation knowledge, because the more you learn, hopefully the more you'll be aware. All right, Dan, do you want to take us out for that official end, and then we'll get to the Q&A?
Absolutely, thank you. So AOPA Foundation is the philanthropic arm of AOPA. AOPA, of course, is the world's largest civil aviation organization, hundreds of thousands of pilots, aircraft owners, aviation enthusiasts, and we love to be able to serve them. Advocacy is a huge part of what AOPA does, and we're going to do it no matter what. But imagine with the couple 100,000 members that we have, and the great work that's getting done in DC and around the country, what we can accomplish with more pilots there. So if you're not yet a member of AOPA, please do consider it to be a part of that community and to help do your part to support general aviation, because we love to do that. And on top of that all, tons of tools, information, discounts, helping you become a better, safer pilot, fly more, have fun, be a part of that community. Great information shared. AOPA is a tremendous hub of general aviation information, and we would love to be able to do that for you. So to renew or to go to membership for the first time, aopa.org/membership.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. Yeah. And hey, don't forget, next episode coming up August 21st. It's a Thursday, so we're back to our normal Thursdays, 12 to 1 Eastern, hopefully 1600 Zulu or 1600 Universal, which we've checked and it should be correct because sometimes we mess that up. But the topic is going to be over the mountains, not through the woods. Tips on tips on safe mountain flying. Really glad to have a guest then. It's going to be Zoyan Harklerud, former best CFI of the year for AOPA. I think it was back in 2018 or 2019. And so hopefully you'll join us for that one. It should be a really good episode. She's a very experienced mountain pilot from out in Colorado. And then if you have any ideas for other topics that you would like us to talk about, please let us know at ftinitiative@aopa.org. I'll make one more throw out there for Stephen. If you have questions about the Wings credit, remember, as long as you registered using the same email address as your FAAsafety.gov account, you're good to go. Nothing to worry about. If for some reason you're concerned, Stephen will put the link in the chat or in the questions or whatever, so you can see that, and there's a form you can fill out. So just make sure you hit us up with that. Otherwise, if you normally get wings credit regularly, you should be good to go. There should be nothing unless you've changed something with your email address with the FAA. You should be good to go and nothing to worry about. Okay, Dan, let's hit us up with some questions. Let's see if we can make Rob's just maybe a little bit nervous with the question, a good challenging one.
Stump Rob. I like
Stump
this.
Rob. That's what we want to do.
Yeah.
Can we stump Rob?
We certainly had a handful of questions, certainly some statements too. So interested to hear your take on that. One came from Ed saying 2 research studies show that half of base to final accidents are not stall spin, but botched steep turns. Data suggests that overshooting the base to final turn can contribute to both botched steep turns and stall spin, and that's easy to teach. Anything there to comment on, Rob?
Yeah, I think there's some great guidance there, and we've seen a decrease in the number of accidents that stack up in that specific phase, and I think that's because we're doing a great job messaging. So let's not let our foot off the gas there. In terms of the difference between what creates the botched steep turn and the sink rate issue versus is it stall or spin, I think we can teach pilots kind of the same technique, right? It's pretty easy to say don't overturn the final, but really we need to be discussing it in terms of load factor, what that turn means, and when they steepen it, what's happening. With parallels, it's harder to say, oh, just accept the overshoot, because now you're on the other side of an aircraft, versus helping them understand, how turning circles work. And accelerated stalls is something I encourage CFIs to practice. It's not something that's covered in the private ACS, and it's not something they need to demonstrate. And when I say not covered, it's not demonstrated. They have to talk about the risk associated with it. It's more of a discussion. But being able to demonstrate to your students what an accelerated stall looks like so they understand how load factor is coming into play. You can do a great base to final turn, or you can even do a downwind to base turn. That's an accelerated stall that kind of helps set them up for how quickly it happens, why it's well above, and sometimes above even like the stall horn kicking on, because they can be rather sudden. And then we can talk about botched steep turns in terms of if they remember their first steep turns, they can see kind of what those descent rates look like. And in terms of how fast the aircraft, when you remove that lift, well, not remove it, when you transition it, how fast that aircraft begins its downward descent.
Cool. So here is a question out of our human behaviors chapter, would be how to counter the local cool pilot, in quotes, I'll air quote it there, who is out there doing all the things that we say not to do. So I imagine this is firsthand experience for things that are done in a way that shouldn't be done, or this that Mark wrote in and said, not great stuff. What can he do to help mitigate that circumstances?
There's like many communities, there are many sub-communities within the pilot community. They tend to be, there was a great study on this looking at a local pilots group, and they were flying low along a river. They tend to lack experts, but that culture tends to push experts away, meaning they eviscerate them in the comments, or they are demeaning to them. You will always have a champion of bad behavior because it's fun and it's cool. The best way we've kind of seen in the safety realm of approaching problem pilots is, one, it's a community. If we don't say anything, all of us look bad, and that's how our local airport gets closed, is because our bad actors, who everyone knows is a bad actor, is causing problems. That makes it into the media. Suddenly the community is concerned, rightfully so, and we end up with, well, what happened to that airport? The best approach is always a peer-to-peer approach, where it's someone they respect. It's challenging to send in a higher subject matter expert to say this is why you shouldn't do this, as opposed to their peers saying, look, I'm really concerned about you. I'm great friends with your spouse, your kids, whatever. I would hate for something to happen to you. I know you think that this is safe, but this is kind of what the accidents look like. I'm not saying it can't be done safely, but the way you're going about it is challenging. And the peer-to-peer relationship tends to work better. It's more, it resonates better. If your best friend comes and says, hey, don't be an idiot, you're like, okay, I shouldn't be an idiot. If your teacher comes and says, hey, don't be an idiot, you're like, okay, well, I'll still be an idiot in front of the class. And even as we get older in life, we tend to relate more to those we have a common experience with. So if someone has a common experience with them, they can help provide that. And again, encourage them to seek training if that's the type of flying they want to do. There rarely is a type of flying that is truly illegal. It just requires certain certifications and a level of proficiency that they may not be engaging in. Again, there are times when it is illegal. We shouldn't be doing that. I don't think I can stand up my amateur photography business in TFRs because I want to film, the president from above. But there are cases where a peer-to-peer relationship does a really, really good job of nipping that bad behavior. But we also have to remove them and recognize that the echo chamber exists within those communities.
Right. Thank you.
I like it.
Here's one for all three of my CFI friends on today. And this was a question from Sherman saying, is safety the reason why CFIs were asked to be a bit less aggressive on the power on stalls with student pilots in training?
You want to start with that one, Rob?
I wanted to hear all of your inputs and then
Okay.
I'll weigh in. But I have strong thoughts.
We could do it. Mary, you want to start off?
I'll let Chris start off. Yeah.
All right, they're throwing me under the. Okay, so was safety the reason why they did that? I think so. I think that from what I've garnered from the ACS process, because that's where it was when we went from the PTS, where we used to do slow flight with the horn on, like minimum controllable airspeed, and now they've from one of the arguments that I heard was that when they change over to the ACS, they didn't want us training people to ignore the stall warning horn. And so therefore they wanted us flying slow flight faster than that. We still do stall at the full brake and still do power on stall at the full brake, depending on the aircraft. But I think it was partly, I think it was an idea of safety there to then try to take away those certain behaviors. Does that mean that I personally believe that we shouldn't also teach the minimum control over airspeed? I think we still should. I like to do things the full brake. I want the student to understand where the limits are and see where that is and experience some of that, because I think just avoiding it, and I've had my own training in the past with, I believe one of my instructors was afraid of spins. And so, because I even asked him to show me when I was working on my private, and he just wouldn't. It just would not do that because I really wanted to see, because I was terrified of it. And so therefore I was terrified of stalls. And it wasn't until later during my commercial and CFI training that I got to push those boundaries. And then I realized, oh, it's not as bad as I thought, and I know what to expect. So I think it was safety is why they did it. Whether that's the absolute solution, I'm not sure. That doesn't mean you still can't go train and learn the other stuff, even though it's not for the check ride. All right, you're up, Mary. What do you think?
Okay, I definitely think it was because of safety as far as why they took it out. I think training a person to demonstrate a skill and demonstrating the skill to that person are two different things. So even though we're not necessarily expected to train the person to proficiently do the entire stall process, that doesn't mean we shouldn't, like you said, expose them to it so they know what it's been like. And I really do think there is an element of getting used to something to take away the panic if it does actually happen. So for a spin, for example, spin training and having that exposure so you're not panicking the moment it's, oh, I can do this, I've done it before. And you have that exposure, you have that experience now, so that it takes away the startle effect that I think a lot of times in accidents, I don't have the numbers, but I'm guessing has some type of effect on how people respond to an emergency happening, whether it be a stall or a spin or even an engine out,
You should find someone who would have the numbers and ask them.
If only someone was around.
If only I knew someone who had numbers.
Yeah, I don't have a startle factor off the top of my head. Sorry, there's a lot of them bouncing around there. That isn't one. I will add a couple points, and I will add my favorite safety word is it depends, and context matters. So the reason context matters is we have to understand that when you're learning in something like a J3, and that's the system you have, you're going to have to go to the full brake. Because you might not have all of the new fangled equipment to let you know that you're coming into the stall. So how do you know that you're stalled? Other times when you have aircraft that have I'll call it a more, subtle stall profile where, you can still have that nose up, but it drifts down. That's hard for newer pilots to conceptualize that. Well, look at your VSI. It's like 300 feet a minute in a descent, but I know your nose is up. The other thing we see when we talk about safety is as you put more horsepower into an engine, you kind of get pretty aggressive pitch up moments there. Or newer students who are training this don't know to slow the aircraft, add drag to it, establish the pitch attitude, then add the power. So they add that power before they really have gotten to the back side of the power curve. And what you see is you see that loop coming up, and now you're going, oh, well, what's the FAA requirement on 2 people in an aircraft and the pitch angle, because we just did it. So you end up with, yes, that's a safety element, but the context matters here. And the other thing we have to be, and you both mentioned it, is desensitized. I need you to recover at the first sign of an impending stall. I can't have you wait, especially when we're talking low to the ground, we're talking that departure stall. If you hear the horn, that nose needs to come down. I can't be having you looking around and being like, oh, I have 5 knots, I have 10. Oh, it comes on a little early, the wind's sucking it out. So I need an immediate response. And we did a study with Liberty University looking at fatal flight training accidents. And one of our thoughts as to why we had seen a decrease in loss of control is because there was that change in the ACS standard specific to flight training, is that we're teaching you to recover the moment you think that there's a stall, as opposed to, oh, we broke, now we are stalled, now I should recover. All of that time adds up, as opposed to beep, down, or the angle of attack indicator is starting to really either scream at you, or it's starting to touch the red, or however yours is configured. I need to make a change. I shouldn't be in this configuration. So getting you to recognize that. The other problem with a stall is, yeah, when you get into like upset prevention recovery training where you are at higher airspeeds, you're typically low, which means you're going to get behind the power curve, and I need you to not be there for the recovery so we can do it faster.
Gotcha.
So it depends. It's a little bit of both, right? We definitely don't want them desensitized to the horn, but at the same time, maybe the exposure to what it does happen is good too. So it's a little bit of all of it. Cool.
Yeah.
Back to the aircraft systems maintenance piece, and I think the opening statement that Matthew shared really sums it all up. But it said overhauls are definitely a point of fierce debate, and then went on to note that the guidance shared today was not necessarily in alignment with Mike Bush, a regular contributor, but again, more of a statement, just like fierce debate, lots of different opinions on that. There's not an absolute, and anything to add to that piece about overhauls?
Yeah, because I like divisive comments, and I appreciate your comment. It is absolute. When the engine fails, it failed. What caused that might be a bit more challenging, but when it's a true mechanical issue, we know that. Now, I understand, Mike Bush presents a position, but I think if you were to talk with him, he would tell you that there's a point where the engine is going to tell you that it's failing. And at that point, it needs to have something done to it, right? We can't just say, oh, we're starting to see things happen, the engine is breaking down, but it will be fine for the rest of its life. What that means is my recommendation is, the manufacturer builds these engines and sees them and warranties them. They have a good idea of when their parts fail, because they understand there's liability associated with that. Mike Bush's position, and I know I'm about to speak for him, so please excuse me, I'm not intentionally doing that, is the engine will let you know when it's failing, and at that time it needs to be addressed. That doesn't necessarily mean that it should happen at a fixed interval. And I'm not always suggesting it should be at a fixed interval, but it tends to work out better from a data standpoint when you say the person who makes the engine, I know we all think, oh, well, they're trying to make money by having more frequent overhauls. That's a common comment, but most people aren't necessarily sending their engine back to the manufacturer. It's another repair shop. There could be a field overhaul. It certainly could be that. Unless you want it to come back as a zero-time engine, a number of overhauls are happening at a more reasonable price point. I understand it is not cheap. It is certainly a sticking point, but I think there is a definitive point that an engine, will fail because it is a component in motion. When that happens isn't necessarily as clear. And I wish I could tell you, all engines blow up at 20,000 hours. They just explode, right? We put a little piece of explosive in there, we put it on a timer, and boom. So you know it. But it is a fierce debate, because if it was free, I think all of us would be doing it at the recommended overhaul interval. It isn't, and so there's some thought that goes on to it. But there is, in my line of work, there's going to come a point where an engine fails, and I can almost always tell you that it's going to be a reason that is something that most likely could have been caught or mitigated.
Well said. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob.
One tool, I'm not sure if we brought it up, but Fletcher mentioned it as part of the assessment of the health of your engine is borescope inspection. So great opportunity, great tool there. Just thought that was worth following up with. Here is one. I want to make sure I click that so I don't ask it again. Wire a portion, this came from Julie, wire a portion of instrument rated pilots not current? What can assist in keeping current?
I mean, I'll take this one too.
Sure. I'll talk about that one. Yeah.
There's as many answers as there are instrument rated pilots.
Well, no, sure, but so if we look at like VFR and IMC accidents, if we look at true UIMC accidents, a third of those fatal accidents are pilots who have an instrument rating. Now, to your point specifically, were they current? Were they proficient? A larger debate. If we can get a logbook, it's easier to discern, but oftentimes it's in the plane and it's destroyed, or it's with a family member, and it's difficult to go and say, oh, I'm so sorry for the loss of your wife. Can you hand us our logbook? We want to see how if she was qualified to be doing this. It's a bit insensitive, and the NTSB tiptoes around that. They're not as forceful, and it's difficult to get information out of people. If you were to ask certain individuals where they keep their logbook, they can tell you. If you were to ask people in their household where that individual keeps their logbook, I don't know. He just puts it somewhere, and I don't really pay attention. When you talk about proficiency versus currency, and when you talk about why it's a requirement, it's easy to do the 3 takeoffs and landings in 90 days to carry passengers because that one's something. But if you're not really ever doing instrument flying, you're not getting that exposure to where you would build those approaches and meet that criteria, right? Your first 6 months. So now you're looking at an IPC always, and that's just working a hassle. And if you're never there, it becomes more challenging. The longer you go from not flying in the instrument world, and say like you've taken a long break and you go and you do your IPC and you're successful, I wouldn't say that you're really qualified to fly an IMC at that point. I would say it's good enough that you can take an instructor and start training back in that environment. You've lost a lot of skill, and as we talk about being honest with yourself, some of the best instrument pilots we see are right going into their check ride for their instrument ride, because that's all they've been doing for the past 50 hours is approaches and IFR work, as opposed to, well, I haven't done it in 5 years, but I did pass my IPC without any problems. So it's easy in a foggle environment. It's easy in what you're probably training in, which is an easier IMC where you're not at hard minimums. There isn't weather moving in, there isn't convective activity in the area, and you're not being just absolutely, bounced around. And with analog gauges in particular, that becomes challenging to say, oh, well, it's been 5 years, but I think I can do it.
And I'd say, just to add on, one of the things that somebody can do too is we see that, I agree, for those reasons. There are barriers there, right? But one thing people can now take advantage of, just in case you're not aware, is that now you can use a simulator like an AATD, Advanced Aviation Training Device. And whereas before you needed to have an instrument instructor with you, you don't anymore. Now you can log the approaches in that sim the same way that you could in the airplane. And obviously that's way cheaper and might be more convenient for you to do that. And not to say you couldn't have an instructor there to help, but that's one way to help keep yourself proficient. So I would recommend that. It's like, in fact, I do that for myself. I get in the sim on a pretty regular basis, usually about once a month, and just make sure I fly some approaches so that I don't lose it. Because Rob is exactly right. I flew a lot of instrument stuff when I was flying freight and all this sort of things, but that quickly went away. And so to keep your proficiency up, and so then I can really hone in on things I want to work on, just BAI and just basic controls, and then slowly build up the complexity of the approaches and things to help.
Excellent, and great segue there, Chris. Nailed it. About Flight Simulator, our friend Santosh had a similar comment of that related to what we're talking about there. Drew, frequent commenter, visitor, watcher, just raised, I think, more of a rhetorical question, but how is controlled flight into terrain an issue with modern GPS awareness? And it's like, yep.
Well, modern GPS doesn't necessarily have a terrain database, and I say modern, but recognize my frame of reference is from the 90s forward. If you don't have a moving map and a up-to-date database, sometimes things move, as we frequently find, or they construct new things. So CFIT isn't just about hitting the mountainside. It is sometimes, as Chris mentioned, a density altitude problem where you can't out-climb the terrain and ahead of you, it's out there. You were able to do it this morning, but now it's the afternoon and the sun's been out and it's really hot out, but what does 200 feet per minute really matter here? That's the top of the trees and clearing the trees. There are other cases where your terrain database is used as guidance only. It's not a specific, it's exactly here and you're exactly here, so this is how close you'll be before you miss it. And oftentimes if you think of in a VFR into IMC environment where the termination is going to be CFIT, you are just so overwhelmed with what you're trying to deal with, fly the plane, even if you're, and you're likely failing at that point, that you don't have the cognitive resources to look out at a terrain function and say, okay, there's terrain to my left. You're just trying to survive and you turn left and boom, you've hit the mountain. And it was just the difference. It was a 50-50 call at that point. So in a vacuum, it works as, oh, well, I have the GPS, I have a moving map, I have a terrain database, I can see this, I can plan, and great to do on the ground. When you get into, again, we talk about being honest with yourself, when you get into that emergency situation, your ability to think is heavily impaired or impacted, and spatial disorientation in particular is an impairing condition. So while you may have the tool, you may not physically be able to use it.
Fair enough. Related to this topic, Wesley mentioned that ForeFlight has a 3D flight sim for seeing these types of situations. So great tool to use to help for that. Russell talked about the effect of skydiving operations is that it's not just terrain as is, but there's preferred side for sometimes for the traffic patterns with that. So there's an alternate preferred pattern. So it's not just terrain itself. There could be extenuating circumstances that need to be considered for that. I thought that was an interesting point brought up there. Rob, when we get to misfueling on the topic there, any idea of how many misfuel incidents there are each year?
It's low. I don't have the exact number, but we're talking really, really small digits in terms of it bubbling up to a fatal accident.
Okay.
And even if you think of regular misfueling, if you catch it and you'd have to, I mean, yeah, you got to drain the tanks out, and that is a hassle. But you haven't made it in the air at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of where I see it in my job is coming into it's had an accident. And so that number is thankfully low, but also we've done pretty good. And there are NATA is one who does a lot of FBO training on misfueling in particular. So they've had a really good course, and I know a number of FBOs require all of their fuelers to go through it to understand that it isn't a simple problem like putting 87 or 93 in your car. It's a big problem.
Okay. You know, besides being there, watching, seeing, smelling fuel going in your aircraft, any other suggestions for recognizing or identifying misfueling situations beyond that?
I wouldn't drink it. The thought I would say is, you know, the problem with Jet A in an avgas engine is you'll probably be good enough that you can start it, run it up, taxi it, get to the takeoff, start the takeoff, and lose it there. Right? It's going to hit you at the most inconvenient location. If you know, where we have dyed fuels, if the dye doesn't look right, and this requires a bit of you know, knowledge in terms of if you stare at enough 100 low lead things, you go, that seems more clear than it should be. Anything that can help you in that. It's difficult because gas has such an overpowering smell. So if there's enough gas in there, it will mask that kerosene smell. But you know, I wish there was like an easy, and I'm sure, you know, somewhere, someplace, you know, in like a lab, they have a test strip that could do it, because they send the fuels off for testing. But outside of a lab setting, it is more difficult to be involved in it, and that's why it's great to have a good. If you don't have a great relationship with your fueler, your FBO, where you trust them and you trust the people who are fueling your aircraft, and get to know your fuelers, so they understand. Oh, this is Rob's aircraft, and I know I only put 100 low lead in it, right? Oh, this is Rob's aircraft that he's not here to watch me fuel it, but I know it's his aircraft because he always talks to me when he's out here. You know, trying to, where you can, establish those relationships. And when you're at a place where it's not as familiar, that's sometimes, you know, where you need to just be present for it.
And there, by the way, in the fueling safety center, if I'm not mistaken, that's on that list, there's a fueling topic on there, and it shows there's part of that video on fuel management, I believe. But they show the thing too of like, how do you test? Because one of the things that Rob was kind of getting is when they mix, you can't tell unless you can smell it, or you pour it on a little piece of like a paper towel, and you can see that oily residue left over from Jet A. So it's I was surprised. I thought it was something where it separated or it did some different color. It doesn't at all. You would not be able to tell by looking at it.
Gotcha. Kenneth mentioned that he had recently seen a webinar suggesting that CFIs are poorly prepared to understand and manage and teach spin recovery. Is there anything that ASI, Mary, Rob, that are working on to help with spin recovery?
Nothing that I know at the moment on spin recovery specifically, but that's definitely something worth looking into. I know it's only a part of the flight instructor. So
Nope, Mary
Oh no.
froze there. Hold on, Mary, you froze. We'll just wait for you to come back on. So we'll see what you said. And to that effect, I believe there's some
syllabus
information.
to actually
Oh, there
do
we go.
it. So
Hey, Mary,
I
you froze for a
definitely
second. Could you repeat?
a CFI going out if they, oh, there, sorry. Yeah,
All right, technical difficulties on this
Yes.
end. That's
A
all right.
little lost comms there. We'll try to get
No
that
problem.
when Mary comes back on. So I think she was getting at the way. I think there is a little bit of information on the ASI, but yes, I want to say it's under the positive aircraft control. There's stuff on aerodynamics. One thing I'll throw out there too is just to go train. You can go train spins with somebody, especially like in an aerobatic airplane, and learn a whole lot for the upset recovery. It'd be really valuable to do. Rob?
And I would push. So we typically handle it in loss of control. We don't really pull it out or separate it. What I will say, and I'll echo your point, UPERT upset prevention recovery training is certainly something of value. Again, it's not free and it does have a cost. However, it's really eye-opening when someone flips the plane upside down, throws it in a spin, and then says, "You have it." In terms of teaching you, wow, I don't know what to do.
Something.
So there's certainly a large benefit to receiving that level of training. Again, when you're looking at a new CFI coming in, we have to be cognizant of how they're coming into the program, what their finances look like, what their end goal is. So the ACS is laid out in such a way, and when it is as specific as it is, we tend to end up with CFIs instructing to the ACS because that's what they need their students to do, is to do those things to get their certificate to advance that CFI in terms of either the hours they're flying or to get their pass rate in a nicer, kind of more successful position. You don't always look good if all of your students are failing. But that's, I understand that that's the sentiment, but we haven't really seen like training accidents stack up with loss of control. And like I said, we've seen that trend go down over time. So in terms of, is it bubbling up in the numbers? No. So there's something that's catching it, or it's more anecdotal, which tends to be a pilot's favorite thing of, oh, I've heard or I've seen or I've felt. And in my world, I hear a lot of that. And my challenge to you is, okay, well, let's look at the numbers and see if it is here. And oftentimes it isn't. That isn't to say that I'm dismissive of someone's opinion and of someone who thinks that there's a genuine concern. But how I operate is I need to see it actually playing out in terms of, well, is it better or worse than what we normally have? And so it's one thing to say, CFIs aren't as good at it, and that may be a true statement, but is it actually generating accidents? And I don't know. Well, I do know that the answer is no at this point, but as we know, instruction takes some time to develop because you train a student and then they are going to constantly go forward with that knowledge, and primacy is a big impact here. Again, I'll say it's the ACS, they're training to the ACS. I don't know if that makes it stronger or weaker for their stall and spin specifically, knowledge, but they're still getting certified. So we have to understand that there is a process and they are meeting that standard.
And just to somebody's point here, it's on the comments, NAFI, the National Association of Flight Instructors, literally just did a webinar on this. I think it was yesterday. So go check that out. I'm sure they have a recorded version. And then didn't mean to cut you off, Rob, to go ahead and finish your thought.
Yeah, my only thing is, at this point, it doesn't seem to be a trend. It isn't. It's something we've heard, and so we are monitoring it, or I'm monitoring it. But until it starts to bubble up, I don't really have a solid answer if we should be doing this. I would encourage everyone, get training in spins. Certainly, don't just go out and show your new student spins. We have to be a little cognizant of what the exposure we're giving them. We don't want to scare them as well. But don't just go out there because you've done it and you've been endorsed. Make sure you have a better understanding. And that's where upset prevention recovery training, that UPERT training, really comes into play. And I'm not saying, oh, we'll go and grab the decathlon now, or a super decathlon or a Stauber or something, and take them up to see what really, spins can look like. But certainly as CFIs, if we can elevate our training, that's one of the added trainings I always encourage people to get, is if they're like, what should I do next? And everyone's like, oh, I want a seaplane license. I'm like, oh, well, it's actually pretty easy, but you should go get some upset prevention recovery training first.
And Mary, did you want to pick up, because you froze during halfway through your comments?
No, yeah, I think you guys covered exactly what I was going to say. Basically, don't teach it unless you know how.
Yeah, well, we actually didn't say that so much, but yes, that's
Okay.
a very good point. And there was a guy, to Rob's point too, I went for a discovery flight when I moved to the school out in Arizona, and this guy was known as the Spin Meister. I didn't know that at the time. We do a discovery flight. I had already had my private and my instrument, I believe, and I was going there to do my commercial, and he was like, well, I can take you on a discovery flight, or we could do spins. And I was like, well, I've never done spins, and that's what we ended up doing. So he apparently loved to do that on discovery flights.
That's building. That's a great experience for the newly exposed pilot. I love it. Chris, you had a great segue from NAFI webinar. They had another one apparently, was to check the bill regarding misfueling. Check the bill, because the fuel, they may get the mistake on the fuel, but they'll never get the bill wrong, right? So it's like in the system of what they are putting in the airplane is going to show up on the bill. So if you can't quite see what went in, or smell, or to Rob's avoidable advice of tasting it, then you can always look on the bill. It's a great last check at that process of what fuel went in. Last one that I see was just a correction from Santosh from what he had shared is ForeFlight's 3D view. It's not a simulator, as noted, but it's a flight path preview, which makes a lot of sense.
It's very cool. I've seen the script. I don't have that one, but yeah, that's very, very cool.
Good. And with that, we're wrapped.
All right. Well, let's just do a quick reminder. Number one, thank you to Rob for being our special guest. We really appreciate you being on and taking the time. So thank you for doing that.
Happy to be here.
And of course, the whole team. So we got Steven behind the scenes, and Dan and Mary. Appreciate you having on the team now. And Dan, thanks for being here. And don't forget, next time, August 21st, over the mountains and not through the woods, as even Rob mentioned, that 200 feet per minute maybe makes a small difference. We don't want to see you going through the woods. Tips on safe mountain flying. So hopefully we'll see you there. Thank you so much for being here today. You'll see this on YouTube probably early next week. And quick note, I did see there's a issue with the post-flight analysis handout. We'll get that fixed and put it on the YouTube posting when that happens. So anyway, thank you all for being here. We appreciate it, and make sure you fly safe till the next time.